Hello.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. I finished
Ah,
my second book, no, my second novel. I finished the sequel to Sine Curve this week.
you finished it?
Yay!
How long is it? How many words?
This is the fucking crazy part. Is it is exactly 333 pages and it's 33 chapters. And
Wow.
I couldn't have planned that if I wanted to. Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
How long did it take you to write that?
uh, The first one is longer and it only took me a year, but this one I've been slowly working on in patches for ever since then, basically. So 5 years, 10,
5 years? Okay.
6 years, 6 years
Okay.
probably. But realistically, if I like smush the time I was actually working on it together, it'd be probably a year again. Like I'd
Okay.
take long breaks of not touching it or thinking about it at all for some reason.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, this recently, basically since I left teaching, I've had like more time to think about it and work on it, and so the most of it has been since last June, I guess, last July.
Yeah. I've been wanting and thinking about writing uh for years now. And um sometimes I'll get like I'll organize, but I'm like never quite there. And I'm like but I think I yes, yes.
Fiction or
I like to
nonfiction?
hear other people's process.
Are you a fiction or nonfiction you're trying to think about doing?
Oh, nonfiction,
Yeah.
I suppose. It's I'm trying to tie everything together, which I kind of touch,
Yeah.
and that the tying together has always been the hard thing. But I think I'm there. I think I'm there.
Yay.
So hearing you talk about this is really good for me because it puts me in the presence and the energy of someone who has forged through that path.
Yes.
That's true. Anytime you like talk to someone or interact with someone who's done something that that you are attempting to do, you're just kind of that's just the nature of reality. So I'm
Yes.
grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it's really fun. I mean, it would be cool if I could get paid to do it because it's definitely my favorite thing to do. But I also don't know, like, these two books specifically, because before that I had done a memoir, so nonfiction, and before that I had done like my poetry collection. So also, I guess, whatever you want to call that. But I had always thought I could never write fiction at all, and that it was far beyond my ability or whatever. And these sort of just like fell into my world or whatever and wanted to come out, and I don't know that I could do this, like, if there is such a thing as an author who gets to just write books like but is expected to then like write a certain amount. I don't know if I
Right.
could do it because I still don't think I have the ability to write fiction unless it's like this and it just fucking like slams into my brain or whatever.
I'm pretty certain that's how like most
Most of it.
prolific fiction writers are. Like as I said, like I kind of like to know other people's processes, and I'll always read if I see an article about an author, a prolific author, just because I find that interesting.
Yeah.
And you hear that, like I'm thinking what's coming to my mind is his name was, I think, Sydney something or other. Like he
Hmm.
wrote like he was very very popular in the 80s. And he wrote like a novel a year, like, and
Wow.
they were always like a Falcon Crest, or like these kind of like regardless. But the point I wanted to make with it, he said like he it just comes from him. Like he sits
Yeah.
down and he doesn't know what he's going to do, and he just starts typing, and they just flow out. And
That's
so
me. Well, and
yeah,
I it's weird because I see all these, the way I teach writing is not the way I write. And the way I teach writing, like, you have all of these processes, all of these structures that you use, and all of this planning that you do to like envision it and like plot it out and all this stuff, and I don't do any of that at all. I'm like that guy. Like, I just sit down. I've kind of realized now that two books are out, that I'll like literally sit down and just like zone out for a while and stare at something, like I'm going into a trance or something.
right,
And
right.
then I'll sit there and like just like the images will start to like build and sort of like, and it's not always linear at all. Sometimes it's like one part from the middle and one part from the beginning and then like a touch at the end or something, and then I'll like when that feels like it's like more than I can kind of hold, then I'll like come out and like just start writing and throwing things in various spots to try and keep it all in some sort of organization.
Do you so you go and you write whatever you're inspired to write at a given time, and it's
Yes.
like it's in the middle.
Yeah.
Like, how do you then how does that come together into one fluid story? Like the next time you write like something which is in between the beginning and that middle piece, like do you like kind of sequence them in your mind, like okay, this is in the middle, or do you how do you fill in those holes?
Um, I I never have to fill in any holes. So I have a document that I keep that's not the manuscript. That's sort of like an outline. So
Okay.
if something comes to me from like the middle or the end, I'll write it out in as much detail as I need to then next time when I do actually get to that part and writing that part, I can look at it and be like, oh yeah, and then write the actual manuscript part of it or that chapter or that section of the chapter or whatever it is. So when I throw it into that document, I just kind of put it somewhere in the outline where I think it might end up, and if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're
Yeah.
doing kind of two things at once. You're
Yes.
like doing the actual writing, but at the same time you are building the structure.
Yes, and so, but it's
Yeah.
and then it's never clear like how that actually goes. So I might, you know, then write like a chapter after that, and then be like, oh, that part I just thought was going to be at the end actually goes right
Mhm.
now, and I like bring it
Okay.
back up, and so I
It's a
kind
living
of,
it's a living document. Like
yeah,
just because you put it in doesn't mean it's cemented there, but it's like okay, now this is a piece in play. This
yeah.
is a puzzle.
And
Okay.
then I also have like I don't know which characters are going to be in the book. I usually the with both books it started with the main character coming into my mind, and so I like saw them and knew them, and so I went and started another document where I keep track of here's their name, here's I go online and I find a picture that's like as close as the image in my head as I can find, and then I write like as much as I can kind of tell about them, their personality and whatever. And so I also have a like characters document,
Right,
and then
right,
as
right.
people pop up, I add them to that because sometimes they never come back, and sometimes they become really important, and I never know
Right,
when I first meet
right.
them, and so I'm kind of like have to keep
Well,
track in case I forget later.
this is so I'm listening to everything what you're saying to me. And so from my perspective, how I see things. So you say like you teach this technique, which
Yeah.
you in fact don't exactly follow,
No.
but you know it and you understand it, like it's in your nervous system. And so,
Yeah.
but it's at a point where you don't necessarily even need to think about that. It's like you what you're teaching people is like, okay, this is how it begins.
Yeah.
You're building a structure, but you know the reality is if you're really a writer you don't use that structure. If you're a
Yes.
researcher, like that's helpful, but a writer, I'm going to create for you an internal etheric neural pathway structure.
Yeah.
And so you're teaching that, and in reality that's just kind of that's the substrate, because how really it does how it flows is this kind of dance. What you're doing is like, yes, you're getting the images that come in, but you also are building like a modified structure,
Yes.
which isn't quite as formal as the one you teach in class, but
Right.
it's like what it would look like once you're someone who's actually doing it, someone who's doing the dance.
Yeah, I do have all the very similar sorts of things. They're like you exactly what you said. They're just kind of embedded already in me, and so I don't necessarily externalize all of them. Um, it's just, and it's interesting because I never, again, like I never intended to write fiction, and so I never intended to have all of those structures like inside
Oh,
of me, ready to come out. But because I've read my whole life, and because I've thought about fiction and taught literature my whole life, like I do have all of that,
right, exactly.
waiting, like
Exactly, exactly. That makes perfect sense. And it's like, I mean, it's the same. It's the same. I think it's the same model with any sort of art form. And the most obvious one I'm thinking about is like martial arts, where like you begin with all of these like very like specific, like let's say movements
yeah,
or like a combination of movements, and it's not really like in real life, if someone were to be like in an environment where they would need to use their martial arts training, like it's not going to be like that.
yeah,
doing is you're creating this on a deeper level, this structure, which yeah, you're going to forget. You're not going to follow it. But then at some point, then the life force energy, the creative energy that makes people people, like it's going to come through and it's going to hit the structure and it's going to know what to do, but it's going to do it in your way. And
Yeah.
that's how I think like all, if you
That's
understand that as a model, like that's applied to every discipline.
that's a really good point. It's applied to every discipline and it's applied to like everything, really. I mean, even
Yeah.
our like bodies are some sort of energy coming into like the lattice work that is
Yeah,
already kind of there to like create the structure and the form.
definitely so.
Wow.
Can I tell you about my week?
Yes, please do. Yeah, you
Uh,
were on Freeman.
so I was on Freeman and I
So
was on T.
exciting. Oh wow, a 2 in 1 week.
2 and 3 days.
Wow. That's
And
awesome.
so it was uh that's like
A lot. A lot of
it's a
energy.
lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because like just the way my inner process is like my head starts going, and I can see it from a lot of different perspectives. So it's like it's
Yeah.
always going. This Gemini moon, I can't. That's just how I am.
Yeah.
And so I try to. So I also recognize, particularly when two podcasts like kind of just show up like one right after another. I don't think I've been on. Um, uh, I've I really haven't done anything besides like since like maybe August,
Yeah.
maybe. So it's been a while for
Yeah.
me. And so it meant to have two like just like this. So there's also this recognizing of and they both went awesome,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they were so different. They were
Yeah.
so different, like both like Greg and Freeman are so different, and then
Very different.
also like kind of like what I was sharing, but they were very complementary. But like the third spoke being like what we were saying before is like you're going to get the inspiration, you're going to get that creative impulse, whatever that whatever however that comes in. So this past week, like all of this like stuff has been kind of coming in, and it's very similar, at least in my world, the stuff which I'm working with right now. It's very similar to how you're just describing that writing process, and maybe it's even like kind of like in parallel. You said like you reached a new plateau, I guess, with this second novel,
Yeah.
and it's like I felt like I hit a new plateau also with this kind of understanding. And can I go into
Wow.
that with you?
Yes, please do.
All right. So there's for whatever reason, like I see very, very clearly connections, like and particularly like across like popular or cultural mediums, like pop culture and history, but then also like all sorts of stuff. It's just what I do. That's what the whole Susquehanna mystery thing was. And I did this whole with Greg. I did this whole talk with Kobe, which is unbelievable. But it's the same thing, and all it is like when you like really like whittle it down, it's it's synchronicities and coincidences.
Yeah.
I'm picking that out. Like, it's whatever that is. Like these are like threads. Like, you think about material reality. That's like rocks. That's a book is more material than like a thread, but it's also less material than a rock. But it's a
Yeah.
different type of thing. So it's like all these different levels. So I these threads. So one of the things which I've always kind of struggled with is how do I there's a part of me that knows this is relevant,
Yeah.
because everything I do is like what matters to me is like, well, okay, well, how do you use that in like in my day-to-day life?
Right.
I'm not interested so much in the abstract. I'm interested in it, but I'm like, well, how does that translate? And so all of these kind of threads, I'm like, how does it translate? How does this make sense? Or like, how is this a working model for something which is maybe has more teeth? And so there's another part of interest which I have, which has always been within the inner process, like psychology and psi work and like all this sort of stuff. And I've always found interesting the idea of how we develop our personalities, the whole thing from like nature and nurture, and that's where astrology comes in, but then also understanding like psychological processes and seeing. So that's always been another thing which I've been interested in as well.
Yeah.
And in that realm, in that field, a popular topic is neural pathways. Do you know what I mean by a neural pathway?
Yes.
So yeah, so it's like, if you read this sort of stuff, you're gonna learn about that, and you're gonna understand like, okay. And I started thinking about neural pathways, and I was thinking about this all this week, and just kind of like maybe getting a little bit outside of like, how the specifically what they are, and being like a little bit more general. And I'm doing this as this, I'm going through in my mind the story, particularly for Greg's show, because I told one story in Greg's show, and I did other stuff on Freeman's show. And the Greg's thing was like really complex, and it's got all of these like kind of like different moving parts. And I'm thinking like, this is a hard thing to describe just through words over like the medium of a podcast. So it's like I really want to think through like what's the best way to structure this? How do I tell this story which it can be understood and it makes sense, because it's all this sort of stuff. So that's just where my mental energy was going. And then suddenly, I don't know why, like this comparison or parallel, as I was thinking like how to explain this, and what is this? What even is this which I'm explaining? And I realized that it's the same thing. It's the same general principle as what a neural pathway is, except it's on the macro level. So to understand what I'm saying, we first got to look at the neural pathway. And so a neural pathway it's inside of you. It's made up of neurons, primarily in your brain, and it's real, but it's not real. And what I mean by that is like if you were to dissect me, you could take out my organs. You'd be like, this is Mike's liver and this is whatever, but like you can't really take out my neural pathways.
Yeah. And even like, if you did, you would never be able to get to what they actually were communicating or holding.
Right. It's like there's something else. Like there's something. They're real things. They really exist. It's in your brain, but it's a little bit different than other things that are in your body. So it's like slightly different. And then the qualities associated with neural pathways is that you can't see them. You can't feel them, like as they're firing right now in your head, like you can't see them or feel them. And particularly the ones which are like the really ingrained ones about like our habits, our routines, our habitual sort of behaviors. Like the only way we can identify them, if we want to catch ourselves doing one, is by looking at our behaviors. Like, oh, I'm going to go do this. I didn't even realize. Or, oh, I just drove my car and I wasn't even realizing I was driving my car. And it's like, that's like the signature. It's like, oh, this neural pathway was firing. And the pathway, is a little bit of a inaccurate word, or an inaccurate image of it, because there are all these different pathways that connect, and they're really a lattice, they're a fabric. And so what we're seeing is they're real, but they're not real. You can't see them, you can't feel them, but you could recognize their when they occur by certain signatures, which are habits and all this sort of stuff. And we know that they are not our primary nature. We're not born with neural pathways. What is primary and what's natural is that we form them. They can serve us and they cannot serve us. It's just the way that we work. But they are all formed by experience. Yeah. Like something comes in. And so what the something can be anything. It can be like doing something as a routine, and it's put in. Yeah. It can be a very traumatic event, that puts in like all this. This is what hypnosis is. This is like, this all ties in like in a way to like unconscious and conscious stuff. Yeah. And then the third or the fourth thing I want to say, and then I'm going to go to the next level up, is that they work through symbolic connections. Yeah. So like, when you say you're triggered, when someone says they're triggered, What they're saying is that there's an existing neural pathway. Like, let's say someone has like PTSD, whatever causes it. What that did was it went through the event, the primary event occurred, and it went through the nervous system with so much force, it burned this pathway in there. And all of the other events like that are tied to that, all of the circumstances that are tied to that event are also coming off this major pathway,
Yeah.
which your body responds to with like shutting down or whatever, whatever is unique. And so what happens is like one of these secondary or tertiary connections, like, let's say you're in a war zone. It's like, you see something and like loud noises and all this sort of stuff, horrific sort of things. And it forms these neural pathways. And then when you're outside of it, seemingly unrelated events are going to, but they are symbolically similar.
Yes.
They're going to touch it. And that's what pulls you into it, because that main neural pathway has like this, I'm calling it a magnetism.
Yeah.
It pulls it in. And so that's the nature of a neural pathway.
This is why, if I could interrupt, I hate it when stupid people are saying things like, that blah, 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 that is my trigger. It's like, you actually won't know what your trigger is until you're in the moment itself. It could be like a white rabbit, and you can have no idea why that would trigger you. And it could be because at the moment that someone like smashed you in the face, you just so happened to be thinking of a white rabbit or something. And you didn't even know that at the time. But then in the moment, like, that happens. And I hate when people are like, this and this triggers me. It's like, you don't know what triggers you until it triggers you. You literally don't know. You can't know. You don't have a list of triggers. You can have a list of possible triggers. By the time you know that it's your trigger, it's probably not triggering you anymore. Because now you're like,
it's complex.
Maybe, right, but
it's very complex. I mean, I think my personal opinion is, as it relates to like like changing behavior, changing ingrained like habitual responses, which is the same thing as changing neural pathways, which is why you use the term rewiring the brain. What the triggers are like, the primary event is a whole lot less important than recognizing when you are in like a state which you don't like.
Yeah.
And so that's what matters, because what you need to do at that time is that's when you disrupt it. That's when you have like all of these different things, like, the tapping, and like, you go and do something to like change what's going on, and then you add a new anchor.
Yeah.
The hypnotic term of like triggers or anchors, they're one and the same. But all of this, what we're describing, is a microcosm for each of us, like as an individual, because it's happening inside of you. It's happening, like you're looking down at it. If you can actually see it happening, you're like kind of away. You're like, okay, this is what's happening inside me. It's my microcosm. And what we also know, if you're paying attention, is that our reality is fractal in its nature.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole thing about like as above, so below comes in, is because when you understand the nature of reality is fractal, that there are going to be many, many levels of the same sort of occurrence, then like this is what we were talking about. Like, oh, once you figure out the underlying like way that something is done, you can apply it to all these different disciplines. That's like, when you get to an underlying level of understanding of something, then you can apply it like up the chain, down the chain, east, all the directions. So if we just described the nature of how a neural pathway is, you can't see it, you can't feel it, it has these signs, it's caused by some event, and then there's a magnetism which all these different sort of triggers pulls us in.
Whoa.
So we know if we know,
I think I know where you're going.
that if this happens below, and that's our microcosm, there has to be a macrocosm.
Yeah.
Theoretically, they're infinite macrocosms. But that macrocosm, it happens somewhere. And I'm just going to generally refer to that as this etheric plane, the same place of reality where archetypes are forms, the same place of reality where the golden ratio like is doing its thing, which then shows itself in our material reality. Like that's a place. We don't really see it, know it, but we can see all of its touches. And so these are some of it, probably like the idea of the golden ratio may be at a deeper level, but we can see things like archetypes. And what I'm going to suggest is going to be ceremonial magic. These are ways in which these pathways are established
Yeah.
within the material reality. And it works very, very similar to the same way as a neural pathway, but it's different because it's in a different sort of mode of expression. It's greater than us. So it's got like, you can't see it, you can't taste it, you
Yeah.
can't necessarily know when it's happening, but you know you're falling into it. You can see it by its signs. And what are its signs? Coincidences and synchronicities.
Yeah.
And you can know like the strength of it is by how many things it's touching to it.
Yeah.
And so I really haven't gone too much further with this, but
Wow.
if the same thing is true with neural pathways, it's like, well, neural pathways, it's that's how life is. That's how this works. And then if these etheric pathways, we're always connecting them. It's always happening. These are these threads. Some are stronger triggers, if you will.
Yeah.
But if we can I understand them and then recognize when we see ones which maybe don't serve us, there are ways of disrupting them, and then to then go and establish new ones.
Yeah.
But the same is true also then on the macro level.
Yeah.
And it's got to be in a way which is similar, a disruptive and an establishing a new one.
Yes.
You know what that is? I don't know. But that's like all of that came this week. Like
That's
that, like,
so
oh,
rad.
this is all the same stuff.
Yeah.
And now it makes a little bit more sense, because as important as recognizing your own neural pathways, us recognizing our collective pathways, and particularly ones that were done in the same way that hypnosis works on the individual person, like there's a macro level hypnosis.
Yes.
And that's what this stuff which I'm good at pointing out is like, oh, macro hypnosis, this is it. This is how it's connected.
Yeah.
This is what it's doing. These are the flavors associated with it. This is what it's anchored to. This is why it's anchored to that. And so being able to articulate that is, that was a cool thing for me.
Hell yeah. That's amazing.
Like, yeah, this has teeth to it.
Yeah.
This is, and going back to how this all began, and I was asking this question, it's like, I've been wanting to write this all down, all these different things which are in my world. Like, I want to put it in this kind of like, it all connects.
Yeah.
And like, this feels to be that fabric, or at least like the foundation in telling the story of like, this is how it all connects.
It also, it makes me feel like that's part of why there are reasons why, people come together and share these ideas and get these out, and like other people, it's connecting with them, and then they're doing this action. So we talked about this in the past few episodes, maybe about like almost building this sort of network, or building this net, literally, and that actually serves this purpose. Because sometimes you can get to the point where you're like, okay, so what? Like, I have 333 pages exactly and 33 chapters, but like, who cares? Like, what does it matter? What is this story for? Like, why does any of this matter that we talk about or whatever? But maybe that is what you're talking about, is that we can actually, disrupt whatever patterns this sort of mass noosphere has been hypnotized with, and sort of like wake us up or something, like disrupt the flow of whatever has been co-opted by forces we're not super stoked with.
So I'll say this. So, the question is like, well, okay, well, why does the 333 matter? Particularly, it only matters to you.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. And that's the thing. It only this is true for all of us.
And it's probably going to matter to people who are like, she's a fucking Illuminati shill. I'm like, okay, whatever.
but
whatever.
This is the truth. So only you can know in your heart that you did not plan this.
I did not. Exactly. I was like, no one's even going to believe me. I didn't even do this on purpose.
So all that matters about this is this. In your logical mind, that you were connected on the level where 3 like, that's a foundation. When we're talking just numbers,
it makes perfect sense to me. It makes perfect sense to me.
It's foundational. It's like the golden ratio is foundational. It can be used one layer up. And so what we're recognizing, particularly when we're talking about, like, let's say, state-sponsored magic, when we're talking about, which includes like all the popular culture, That's just one layer up.
Yeah.
More foundational is the stuff that they are using in order to work with it.
Yeah.
And so when you are, so there's, we all have a blind spot because we all been born into this. Like we don't, we haven't, we're not, we have not been told what you and I are discussing right now. Like you and I are identifying like, okay, this is what's happened.
Yeah.
And so the next level is you're like, well, if you are being really honest with yourself, you have to say, is like, am I just like regurgitating something which has been planted in me? If you
Yeah.
don't ask yourself that, you that doesn't mean it's true, but if
Right.
you're not being true to yourself.
I
And
wonder
so
that.
you have to wonder that. And so the
Yeah.
question is, like, how do I know when I do something like something which is an inspired work? And ultimately, this is only a question for oneself.
Yeah.
And or how do I know, this is like voice to skull technology? That's a possibility. It's
It is.
because you had a crazy sync.
Mm-hmm.
Because and you begin to realize that, and you begin to recognize like what is connected at a deeper level.
Yes.
I don't know who programmed numbers originally. I don't know who built the golden ratio. I don't know
Right.
anything like that. All I know is that's at a deeper level.
Yeah.
And so that is more trustworthy, in my opinion,
Yes.
than like, okay, well, yeah, the Lady Gaga song was playing in the background of
Yeah.
the coffee shop, and somehow it got implant,
Right.
whatever your imagination wants to create. But I mean, there's a truth to all that, and so it's like what we're identifying is ways of navigating,
Yeah.
while at the same time understanding the system. So that's all happening. And then at the same time, we're seeing things like exactly like the coming together of logic, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that is exactly like, well, that's a real pathway. Like that's one which is not necessarily like, um, has like ultimately going against someone else's free will, like doing something like subliminally sneaky, underhand, which is the nature of popular culture and like probably technology and all that other stuff. It's underhand.
Right.
And it's like, the, that's what I think is the separation or the different or the difference between it. And so like we're going to come together in a non-underhanded way, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah.
But there will undoubtedly be connections, and they will be anchored in the material reality in a very, very specific place that we have some degree of understanding of what the significance of that place is.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. All of that is going to be happening with this intention, for me at least, of especially now that we're discussing it in these terms of like disrupting whatever we might be able to disrupt of a pattern that was set without everybody's full agreement in the past
Yeah.
and the future.
Yeah, it's empowering. It's empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so let me just say this. So again, I'm sharing this. I struggle with what you said with what you said earlier with like, why do people are going to be like you're crazy, or why does that even matter? And you're like, I know from your perspective it does matter, because I know when I have those things, it really only matters to me. But the reason why I like to share them is because it is to really inspire other people and to encourage them. It's like, listen, this is important stuff. You might
Yeah.
not understand why, but we want to recognize the value of it.
Because it reminds people to be kind of like looking and listening for those things in their own life as well.
Because they're going to start tapping in on life on that level, because
Yeah.
life is magical. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is like the definition of magical is you're constantly making impressions on this etheric realm, which the which is using it against you all the time, is
Yeah.
telling you it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Hey, can you see it? Can you see it? Measure it. You can't measure it. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And all this stuff. Well, we're figuring that out. That's happening all the time. So here's the disruptive. So this is a personal story of what I was saying, but this is like just like a tiny example of the disruption. 2 times I've told you these stories, like the whole Joe Biden 333
Yeah.
300 posts. Like we
Yeah.
talked about it, and then like something happened, which was like both embarrassing to him
Yeah.
and and so like that's a disruptive. That's like
Yes.
that's like, and then the same thing happened with this a little bit differently, but it was like a very similar thing with the Kobe with this Kobe story. with like the check I got in the 332. That was a little bit
Yeah.
and so what to me what this all is an indication of is, again, like, what does that matter? It's an indication of like we are affecting this too, and by like kind of like not taking it too seriously and laughing at it, but like there's also like you're messing it up,
Yes.
you're disrupting it in a way, and you're tapping into your own whatever it is that is pulling you in your story for your creative story. We all are here doing our creative stories.
Yeah.
Like this is how we're beginning to recognize, like, okay, I can say with certainty.
Yes. I love it. And like you're talking about, like synchronicities happening or whatever with the book, but when I look at it as a whole, especially both books together, then I see this, it's not just like a few synchronicities here and there. It's like synchronicities and strange events that have been happening throughout my entire life all connect to this story and how it came about and how it's like existing in reality now, and like all of it is like one giant interconnected web of crazy, significant, whatever bits of meaning.
It's an indicate. It's a reflection. It's a reflection of like, again, no one here knows what exactly this is,
Right.
but we're starting to see, and I said this on the Freeman show. It was actually Freeman who said it. He was talking about this being like a new science, and I was like, that's exactly what we're seeing.
Weird.
It's a science and an art form.
Yeah. Wait,
It's
just
both.
someone just posted something in Eyes Open that was about the science of magic. So it's just weird that now
Well,
that's coming up again.
well, that and so, and I'm going to go. I think that makes perfect sense with when Matt. I'm in 100% agreement with that. When the definition of magic is making impressions on the etheric realm,
Yeah.
because that's what all of this is a reflection of. Like this is how the etheric realm like influences our material realm,
Yeah.
and it shows itself through these things. And what else do you have as your guide point? If you go and you look at the Judeo-Christian tradition, what's very very common is this like looking for signs from God. Looking for confirmation.
Yeah.
And so, what I've noticed, or at least the conclusion which I've reached, is that anything that's coming from the mainstream, um, they point at truths, but a lot of times like parts of it are inverted. And the biggest part is like there are these misdirections. There's yeah, you should be looking for something, but I'm going to tell you the wrong thing to look for.
Yeah.
Like I think 2012 would be an example of that. Like
Good
something
call.
happened in
Yeah.
2012, but everyone was kind of looking in the wrong place, wherever the right place would be.
Yeah.
And so within that Judeo-Christian uh, um, history, which is so influential to culture, is this idea of like looking for confirmation for like a higher power. And like these are what the confirmations are.
Yeah.
Nowhere in the Bible are they saying like look for the confirmation and synchronicities
Yeah.
in any way which can show itself in your life. And I think because we naturally want to find confirmation,
Yeah.
and that's been pushed upon us. They're like, you should be looking for confirmation. And ultimately it says all you can do is have faith. Believe me.
Yeah. Just trust.
Eventually accept something without seeing it with your own two eyes. Now that being said, I know quite a few people who are very like devoutly religious in multiple different faiths. And those people who I say are truly touched, they carry something. They carry a confirmation, a knowing, which other people do not. So
That's
I don't think it's limited to seeing synchronicities and numbers. I
well.
think,
I would, maybe I'm wrong, but for me at least, I feel like I always say like I think I have a deeper faith than most religious people, right? And it's so it's like unshakable, and it's because of like gnosis that I've gained through experience and through
yeah,
things like synchronicity and certain
yeah.
experiences and whatever. And so I see that too. Like, I mean, I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, that's exactly what I'm suggesting also, is like this idea that there comes like a knowing, and you can have that knowing in any sort of like where you put your mental idea, right? You know, your belief, like, oh, I experienced a knowing and I put it in a context of Judaism. I put it in a context of Christianity. I put it in the context of ayahuasca. I put it in the context like, but the deeper truth is, and not everyone who's touched all of those things has gotten to the level of a knowing.
Yeah.
And the knowing is that's the thing which is true. And then it could just be applied and experienced in these different sort of contexts. But I'm going to suggest like it's the day-to-day stuff, like the seeing the 333, whatever that happens to be meaningful to you, just as like seeing Mary in an oil stain in your driveway is going to be immensely meaningful to you.
Right.
Like it's the meaning, and then we get to play. But when I see it as numbers and like your life narrative, I think that's as deep as it goes, because that goes beyond the context, because it's the context of your life, and that would be true for everyone. And that's what to me is like the ultimate confirmation sort of pieces to really move through this labyrinth, which we're sharing together.
Yes. I've always been pretty focused on the Trinity and the idea of like the meaning of the number 3 and what it represents, and especially in the context where 0 is a number in the sequence, and so it's actually the fourth. It's 3 and it's 4 at the same time in a way. It's also 2 and 1 at the same time, like in my mind. And I've always like been adding little pieces to my understanding of this number throughout my life, and so it's a weirdly significant number for me. And if you ask me what my favorite number is, I wouldn't even say 3, but realistically, it's like the number that I've spent the most time thinking about. And it's interesting how many ways 33 comes up in the world, as and everyone wants to jump on the like Masonic thing or whatever, but I'm like, that's almost just like a distraction, because there's all these other instances of 33 that are so important, and and then they just become kind of lost because they're not the like sexy evil or whatever. It's like easier to pay attention to.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
All right. I think this might be a really, really interesting show for you to do, or guest. Guest also. I don't know if how you go about your selection process.
It's totally random. It's just whatever comes along.
This guy wants to be a guest, but there's a guy who I just know through Instagram, and he talks about numbers in a very unusual way. And he's the guy who I've had a lot of these connections with over Instagram. And it's always about like, it always is for us come down to threes. And he's got this interesting way about him and the way he understands it. And I think that based upon everything you were just saying, like that would be a fascinating conversation. Like, and I don't know where it would go.
Who is
it? His name, you're obviously in front of your computer.
Yes.
If you look on Instagram, his name is Tim, and this is no spaces or underscores. Tim and Vicstagram, VIC.
Tim AND.
TIMAND VIC Vicstagram.
Okay, I got it on my phone as a reminder. So hopefully that'll work. That'd be really fun. That's exactly how I pick guests. It's just people will either suggest them randomly, or I'll like stumble into something and I'm like, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if this person would come on Rogue, and then that's how it goes.
And I think the guy, I'm not really certain what like his backstory is, but he's a significant. He's significant within the skating culture.
Interesting.
And I think like what I'm gathering is like he was like on like the early like New York City street skate scene of like the 80s. Like he was like a prominent guy. So like he brings in this really interesting like I don't know that, but that interests me. Like he's got like a lot of followers, and half of his posts are about numbers and the other half is about skating. So it's like
that's rad.
It would be interesting no matter what. So, I'll send him a message after we get off, and I'll just tell him like, hey, I don't know if you're interested, but you're out there, and I'll let them know that you might be reaching out.
Please do. That'd be awesome.
That would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
Can I?
I've been like flying through guests this year, but it also feels like a normal pace. It's weird. Everything picked up speed and at the same time feels like it's the exact same speed. So I guess that's a good thing.
Well, this week, or actually it was last Sunday, Mars moved into Capricorn.
Okay.
And so Mars is in Capricorn for like 5 weeks or so. Like, a Mars year is close to an Earth year. So it stays that long in a sign. And Mars in Capricorn is a really, really good placement for getting shit done in the real world.
Well, that makes sense. Why all of a sudden I was like, I need to get this book done right now, and I just started like pumping it
I
out.
felt it immensely strong. I
Yeah.
felt it is immensely strong. Like normally, like stuff like that, like I might be like mentally aware of, but I don't necessarily see it immediately in my life.
It was like
And
a flip switched, or a switch flipped. Yeah,
yeah,
whatever you're
yeah,
supposed to say, and it
exactly.
just like was done.
The other thing was that it was Mercury retrograde went on the same time, and there's been like a lot of weirdness with like communication, like
Yeah.
flip switch.
Yeah. Yeah, like that. Yeah, no, seriously, both things have been suddenly very obvious to me. So the further I go in life, the more I realize that kind of shit actually does affect me very strongly, whether I know it or
Yeah,
not.
that's awareness. That's the definition of like, oh, well, what is awareness? Oh, I realize something is affecting me when I never realized that before.
Yes.
My awareness.
Yes.
Can I tell you a interesting story? Because we like to tell stories.
Yes, I love stories.
All right. So I've been on this kick the past maybe 2 months, stringing together movies, like seeing the same actor in different movies, and seeing how like there's certain threads that are happening throughout the storyline. And this idea of thought, I was inspired by like Chris Knowles' work when he first started talking about like how certain actors carry the same archetype throughout all these different films.
Yeah.
I started looking at it a little bit more differently. I was like, well, what about storylines? Are they carrying that? So I'm seeing it all over the place. And one of the things which I'm recognizing just in my own experiences, like as you begin to really start paying attention to these stories, like you get involved with it. This is like the magnetism of like something that was put on there. Like
Yeah.
suddenly now I'm playing with it. So I'm going to give you another one of these stories, and it's friggin' nuts, or at
Okay.
least it's nuts for me. I think it's funny. It's crazy. So I watched Interstellar,
Yes.
and so Jenny, she's my partner, and so she's been wanting me to watch this with her for a long time. She's like, I know you're gonna love it. I'm like, I just don't like space films. Like, they feel claustrophobic for me. I don't. There's hardly. That's just how I am. And
Yeah.
she kept on saying it. And then she said that to me about The Martian, and I friggin' love The Martian because it was the most obvious example of what I was just telling you about, this continuity of characters. And what The Martian is, if you have the right eyes to see, is it's Goodwill Hunting as an adult. Are you familiar with either of those movies?
I'm only familiar in that I know that Matt Damon's in them, and I have like the very basic plot in my head, but I've never seen either
If
of
you
them.
were to go and watch them back to back, you'll see that the Martian character is who the young Goodwill Hunting grew up to. They're
Wow.
exactly the same. But anyway, so I was like, all right, I was like, I'm going to go with it. So we see Interstellar, and I'm watching. I'm like, and I'm talking about the Martian, and then sure enough, Matt Damon shows up to it, and
Yeah.
I forgot that he was in it, and I didn't know that. All sorts of stuff like that. So there's all of these kind of personal syncs with this movie, and I'm really enjoying watching the story, and like seeing like the connections in my mind. So now this is my personal story. Like I've certain things which are very very meaningful to me, like things which physical objects which I know carry like connections.
Yeah.
So one of my watches has always been that for me.
Yeah.
Uh, I never actually use one, but I like the idea of a watch. I've got a strange relationship with time, but there's something about watches which is meaningful. And I used to have this really awesome watch, and then it went, I, it got ruined, and that's a whole nother story. And I got another watch right when I was in the middle of doing all of this Susquehanna mystery research. I mean,
Hmm.
this is like, I did about 2 years of research to fill that up. And one of the things which I discovered in that research was that Hamilton watch. It's a brand of watch. One was it was headquartered here in Lancaster, and it was named for the founder of Lancaster, which my research shows like has all this Rosicrucian sort of connection. And like I lived right by there, and so and for that reason, I was like, because my old watch, which I used to like so much, was destroyed. I'm like, that's an old part of my life. I'm going into a new part of my life. I'm going to go and get myself a watch. I'm going to get myself a Hamilton watch because I have a connection there. Like that's my logic system. And I'm particular about anything that touches my body. So I went and I looked at all the different Hamiltons, and like I found the one which was perfect. Like it was like made just for me. I got skinny little wrists. I need like a small watch, and like I really am particular about all this stuff, and the price was right. And so I go and I get it. And so the watch, like it becomes ingrained. It started out like as a very like purposeful conception, and then it gets ingrained in my like day-to-day life by wearing it. And around this August, there's a friend of mine. Mr. Rich is what I call him. This guy is fantastic. He should be on your show too. But anyway, and his son's name is Case, and Case quite literally graduated #1 from his class from the Rolex School of Watch Repair.
Wow.
Like that's a special type of brain to do that. And so I'm like, Case is going to fix my special watch because he's the son of Mr. Rich, and like, you know, all this sort of stuff. So I give it to Case, and the MFer kept my watch for 6 months. They're like, I'm calling him up. I'm like, Case, you know, you got my watch, but that's just how Case is. Case has got he's an amazing person, but like where he struggles is like communication, like getting things done. But I'm surrendering to the greater wave of like, I know this watch is important to me. I know that Mr. Rich is important to me. And like, I'm like, maybe I want my watch back, but there's a reason why it's not there, and just trust the process.
True.
So all that happens, and about 2 weeks ago, I finally sit down and I watch Interstellar, and the sub plot of Interstellar is it's really an interesting film, and it's a Christopher Nolan film, and that dude, he works on deep levels. Whether or not you like the storylines or not, like pay attention. And the guy is like, there are a couple people who are really good at communicating stuff, and he's one of them. So one of the sub themes within the movie has to do with like dimensions and time.
Yes.
And what they use as a device in the movie is the father, he kind of goes really far away, and he has to go through like a black hole, and he calls it out like times in a play. But then he's able to figure out, like, when he goes through a black hole, that he can tap into different dimensions, and from that, a higher dimension was able to create like a structure where he was from the 5th dimension able to go and affect the 3rd dimension.
Yes.
And it sounds like a complex thing to be able to show in a movie, but they did it very well.
Very well.
And the device which they used, I'm telling you this way because I know that you're a storyteller, is they used a watch. Mm-hmm. And this thing that was happening in the beginning of the movie where like books kept on falling out of his daughter's bookshelf, and there was this strangeness with the watch, like suddenly it makes sense because this was him like in the other dimension, and this was the only way he could go and connect and contact and communicate with his daughter. Okay. Yeah. And so it was all about the watch. It was like, yeah, the books, but the watch. That watch is a Hamilton watch of the exact same model.
What?
Which I have.
Wow.
And I just got my watch back yesterday.
Wow.
On 22020. And a whole bunch of other stuff.
I got chills.
So if there's like, if there's like an interdimensional black hole,
yes.
I mean, like this is the level of like, this ain't Mike. This is how the game works. It's like someone else, if they're that tapped in. Yeah. The only thing which I think I do, which is maybe of unique and what I would like to inspire in people, is like this etheric realm is real.
Yeah.
You work with it however you want, and it will give you feedback. But you
Yeah.
got to pay attention, and you got to free yourself of what you think it is,
Yeah.
because it's friggin' wild.
Yeah, you're not gonna lock it down to a specific structure, which goes back to that idea of trying to do magic as a science. Like, some part of me is like, we're never going to have it as like a science. Somehow, like, it's going to resist that formalization or something, I think. But I still think for each of us, like you're saying, individually, we find the way, and you can get as scientific as you can about it, of how we interact with it.
Well, I'll bring it back to what you said in the very beginning of this conversation.
A kitty on your
and
back.
and that was when we were talking about like how in order to actually write a book, like there's this structure which needs to be happen.
Yeah.
In reality, you don't use that structure. If you're looking at, in my opinion, if you're looking at magic from purely like it can be a science and we can look at it like a science, you're just looking at it at the level of that structure of what you were talking about. Like, there's a truth to it. There's a structure. It can be measured. There's a way. But the higher truth is, if you want to work with it, you move past the structure.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly perfect. Bringing it all back together into one little tiny bow. I love it.
Yeah.
And I love that the cat came to sit on your back for that bow.
Yeah. She's a percher.
She loves it. That's so cute. Well, I think that might be the perfect place to end the things then.
I would agree.
Awesome.
I think this was a good one. I'll
Yes.
get in touch with Bobby, and right after we get off the phone, and we'll talk next week.
Awesome. It's always good to talk to you, Mike.
Likewise. Talk to you soon. Have
right.
a great week.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.